Alright, so I want to add a accessory resource for you guys. I know the last video was a little bit long, so if you want to watch the dissections for the Unit 4, we have them here. If you don't want to, it's fine, but I just wanted to add an extra resource just so you guys can actually see the structures that I talked about in the previous video in actual real donors. So we're going to start off with the dissection of the inferior mesenteric vessels. Here, if I press this right here, this looks a little bit jumbled, so don't worry too much about this. But I'll go over some of just the general structures we do need to know. So we have our transverse colon turning into our descending colon, right? In the bottom, it would be sigmoid colon, right? And then we have our rectum down there as well. But something I do want to get you guys to understand and see, right? We have our pyloric sphincter here turning into our duodenum. We have our psoas major in the back. You can also see next to psoas major, you have your abdominal aorta. And we can also see our inferior mesenteric artery. One thing that we can also note is the splenic vein, right? Splenic vein, right? And we could also see the superior mesenteric vein as well as the inferior mesenteric vein. Right, we can't see the hepatic portal vein, but we can see those three. And we can see our kidney here. And we can also see our renal pelvis turning into our ureter. Right? Coming all the way down, going to the urinary bladder. Right? And we can also see that we have our renal veins, right? Renal veins. And we can also see we have our renal arteries as well, right? So renal artery, renal vein. And that's about it for this dissection. I think that's the extent of the things that we can see here, besides the ovarian vein. Right, besides the ovarian vein, right here, you can see the ovarian vein. Right, but that is the extent. We can move on to the next dissection. All right, we're looking at the upper abdomen. So let me just highlight this. There are a couple anatomical variations here, so I wouldn't focus too much on this one. But just generally, you have your liver, your gallbladder, right? You have the body of the stomach, the fundus, the body, and you have your pyloric sphincter. Then you have your duodenum. You have your transverse colon on the bottom, right? You could also have your pancreas. You can see right next to the the lesser curvature of the stomach, right next to the lesser curvature of the stomach. You can also see your celiac trunk, and then you have your three branches. But some of the arteries, right, have some type of anatomical variation, so I wouldn't worry too much. But your celiac trunk is in this general region, connected to your abdominal aorta. Yeah, I think that's all I would really touch on, because some of the things here are they do have some type of anatomical variation. So we'll look at another dissection. But you can also see the greater omentum here. Lesser omentum would be right here. Right, lesser omentum. Right, and that's about it. You have your diaphragm on top of the liver, of course, and that's all I would worry about here. Right, you can't see too much. Right, clearly. Now we can move on to these renal dissections. So posterior aspect of this is the anterior, then we're going to move on to the posterior. So this is the anterior aspect of the kidney. So you're seeing your right, left kidney. You're seeing your inferior vena cava and turning into your renal veins, right? You see your renal pelvis turning into your ureter. And you also see your abdominal aorta. You see your celiac trunk, your superior mesenteric artery, and then your suprarenal glands right on top of the kidneys, right? Supra, above, renal, kidney, gland, something that secretes, right? So suprarenal gland, right? You see all of these different structures. I want to move on to the posterior aspect so we can kind of see it flipped. All right, posterior aspect. Now you have your left kidney where your right one was in the previous image, and your right kidney where the left one is in the previous image. And now you're not seeing the IVC so clearly, you're seeing more of the abdominal aorta. All right, so this is still your IVC, this is still your abdominal aorta, your suprarenal glands, you can still see your ureter and your renal pelvis, right? Your renal artery, renal veins. So not too much has changed, it's just been flipped 180 degrees. Okay, now that we have that, I'm going to move on to the last two dissections. The first one is the left posterior abdominal wall. So let's move here, right? So the first thing I want to mention, right, we have our stomach on the top, we have our greater omentum cut, right? We have the pancreas right under it, our spleen on the left side, we have our kidney here, we have our quadratus lumborum in the back, right? It's being occluded by the kidney, so you can't see much of it. You can only really see half of it. So our quadratus lumborum here. We can also see psoas major. Our abdominal aorta is here, but it has some tissue on top of it, right, and some nerves as well. We can also see here the splenic vein, right, going to the spleen, right. We could also see our inferior mesenteric vein, and also coming off of our left renal vein, right. This is coming from the IVC, right. We can also see our gonadal or ovarian vein for this individual image, right. So always write gonadal. It's so much easier to just write gonadal, I promise you. And our renal veins, right. Then we have a renal artery, right. Renal pelvis turning into ureter. I think that is the extent. Right, abdominal aorta. I think that is about it for this dissection. Yeah. All right. And now we're going to move on to the last one. But one thing I want to mention here, ovarian artery, right? So to say gonadal artery coming off the abdominal aorta, right? It doesn't really look like it. It kind of looks a little bit jumbled, but it's there, and I just want to mention it. All right, now I'll move on to the last dissection of the posterior pelvis. I think this is the best dissection. This is the one I really wanted to show you guys because it highlights a lot of these structures that we can actually see in our donors. So this is very similar to what we can see in our donors. So I wanted to make sure this one I spent the most time on. So here, right, of course, we have our abdominal aorta splitting into our common iliac arteries, right? So common iliac arteries. Common, of course, means there's going to be some type of bifurcation as we move down that artery or vein, right? So this common iliac artery is splitting into our external, right? Our external is turning into the femoral artery, right? But we have our external iliac artery, we have our internal iliac artery, right? External, internal iliac artery coming from the common iliac artery. And then we have our inferior vena cava, right? Which is splitting with the same pattern. So we have our common iliac vein splitting to form our external iliac vein and internal iliac vein, right? Somewhere in the back there. Right, so we have our external iliac vein coming from our common iliac vein, and you can't quite see the internal, right, but it's going to the pelvis and the perineum. I also want to note our kidney up here, right kidney, right, we can see a ureter coming all the way down to the urinary bladder, right, ureter coming all the way down to the urinary bladder. We can also see our inguinal, right, ligament, right, inguinal ligament right here. We can see the inferior mesenteric artery here. Psoas major, right? We can also see quadratus lumborum, and I think that's everything here. I think that's all we need to worry about here for this cross section, this dissection. Obturator nerve is there. Don't worry about that till next week. But yeah, that's everything that we need to know that we can see in this image. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and upload this. Have a good rest of your week, guys. I hope this helps.